The dense jungle of Y-Laura-9 thrummed with life, each leaf and vine quivering as if whispering secrets. Kael Thorne crouched in a shallow stream, his dark, ragged tunic clinging to his powerful frame, skin damp with sweat and the grime of 6 days of survival. The scent of alien flora was sharp in the air, mingling with the metallic tang of an electric storm gathering on the horizon. Every muscle in Kael's body tensed, coiled tight like a predator's. He was the hunter now, and he'd been hunted long enough. His eyes caught a glimmer of movement, blue, ethereal, and impossible. Emerging from the thick ferns and shimmering in the fading sunlight was a being unlike any Kael had ever seen. Tall, her silhouette cut through the twilight like an ancient vision. Her glowing blue skin seemed to ripple, merging with the stream as she stepped forward, each graceful stride punctuated by the sway of long, flowing white hair. A spear with a luminous core gripped in her hand, its energy humming with barely contained power, the spear's head casting reflections of light that danced across the jungle leaves. Kael's heartbeat quickened, but he kept still, eyes narrowed. This was no ordinary hunter. The way she moved spoke of ancient knowledge, practiced and precise. As she paused at the place he had stood moments earlier, she dropped to one knee, inspecting his footprints with a critical eye. A slow smile stretched across her lips, the kind that spoke of both admiration and challenge. Impressive, she murmured in a voice that resonated like a musical chime. Her eyes met his as she tilted her head, an unreadable glint sparking behind them. No one has evaded me for this long, especially not unarmed. Kael pushed himself to his feet, the water cascading down his form like a veil. I'm flattered, he said with a smirk, voice low and rich. But most people introduce themselves before they start chasing me. The alien huntress laughed, a sound that filled the clearing and seemed to brighten the air itself. You were never prey, Kael Thorne. This has been a test, and you have shattered every expectation. Kael raised an eyebrow, stepping forward but keeping a careful distance. A test, huh? The huntress stood tall and proud, eyes locked with his, as if daring him to doubt her words. I am Jessa Seraph, High Huntress of the Salarian Trials. And you, Kael Thorne, are the first human to not just survive but thrive in the sacred grounds of Y-Laura-9. Kael's smirk turned into a smile, a mixture of pride and intrigue. Well, Jessa, it's nice to know I'm not just another name on a list. But why was I put through this trial? Jessa's eyes glimmered, her voice dropping to a husky whisper. Among my people, trials are more than just proving strength. They're for selecting those who may share our legacy. Legacy? Kael echoed, crossing his arms as he studied her, heart thumping with more than adrenaline now. You mean you're looking for a partner? Jessa's expression softened, and her spear's glow dimmed as she lowered it. Not just any partner, Kael. Someone who embodies skill, resilience, and a spirit worthy of our future. Among the Salarian, we believe exceptional traits should endure, passed on to the next generation. Kael's jaw tightened, a mix of surprise and amusement flashing in his eyes. So, I'm not just surviving. I'm auditioning. Crude, but accurate, Jessa replied, tilting her head with a sly smile. But you've proven yourself more than worthy. You're strong, inventive, and you've weathered this trial without so much as a weapon. Her voice deepened. I find that appealing. Kael's chest rumbled with laughter despite the situation, and he took a step closer. And here I thought my greatest victory would be a warm meal and a place to rest. Jessa chuckled, the sound rich with mischief. Among my people, to survive a trial is more intimate than a meal. It's an unspoken pledge, a bond forged in the heart of the hunt. A roar echoed through the jungle, deep and primal, slicing through their banter. Kael's instincts roared to life. And I'm guessing dinner's going to have to wait? Yes, Jessa said, her eyes hardening with the focus of a true huntress. It seems our hunt has drawn unwanted attention. She held out a blade, polished and silver, the edge gleaming under the canopy's fractured light. A gift for your first test, she said, tossing it to him. Kael caught it, feeling its weight, perfect, lethal, an extension of his own will. "Well, in my world, weapons are a lot more meaningful than trinkets," he said, a grin curling his lips. Jessa's eyes met his again, a flame of excitement lighting them. "Then prove it, Kael Thorn. Show me why I chose you." The ground quaked as the first beast burst through the foliage. It was massive, a fusion of the fiercest predators Kael had ever imagined, scaled, horned, and with eyes that glowed a menacing red. Two more emerged, their low growls harmonizing with the first. They moved as one, like a deadly chorus. Kael took a breath, his body aligning with Jess's. Their movements, as fluid as water, mirrored each other's, two predators in a deadly dance. Jessa's spear sparkled with energy as she surged forward, the weapon carving a path of light. Kael followed her lead, blade flashing, drawing a line of blood from one beast's flank. The creatures faltered, their movements hesitant, confused. "They're not acting like wild beasts," Kael said, twisting to deflect a strike. "Something's off." Jessa's voice came low, dangerous. "These are no ordinary hunters. They've been enhanced, modified, the work of the Dra'thaan clan." Kael's brow furrowed, the name sparking recognition. "Rivals of yours, I take it?" "They've always opposed me," Jessa spat, her spear striking down one of the beasts with precision. "They seek to control, to twist nature to their will. They wouldn't dare attack the trials unless they had no choice." Kael finished, leaping as the largest creature charged, its horn crackling with unnatural energy. He rolled into the creature's path, blade finding its mark in a vulnerable spot beneath the beast's jaw. It roared, blood sizzling as it fell back, its 6 eyes wide with surprise and pain. "By the stars!" Jessa exclaimed, her voice full of reverence. "You're even more magnificent than I thought." Kael stood, panting but grinning. "So, is this when I get that dinner?" Jessa laughed, the sound of promise. "Survive this, and you'll have a feast fit for legends. But first..." The jungle seemed to hold its breath as the second wave of beasts surged forward, eyes glinting with deadly intent. This was no longer just a fight. It was their first trial as mates, proving they were worthy of more than just survival. It was the start of something neither of them would ever forget. The jungle erupted into chaos as the remaining beasts surged forward, eyes glowing with an unnatural hunger. Kael could feel the pulse of the jungle beneath his feet, as if the planet itself held its breath. Beside him, Jessa's spear hummed with energy, ready to strike. She was every bit the embodiment of the Salarian's might, but Kael knew she couldn't do this alone, not against an enemy that was more than just a predator. These creatures were engineered to kill. The first beast lunged at them, its massive, scaled body rippling with power. Kael sidestepped, rolling to his feet and spinning with a swift slash that sent a spray of iridescent blood into the air. The creature shrieked, rearing back, its 6 eyes filled with rage. Jessa moved like lightning, striking with a flurry of precise thrusts that forced the beast back. The glow of her spear illuminated the clearing, casting eerie shadows that danced like ghostly phantoms. Kael didn't wait to admire her skill. He pivoted, catching the charge of the second beast in his peripheral vision. It was smaller but faster, its horn crackling with an electric charge that threatened to split the air. Kael's heart pounded as he leaped sideways, narrowly avoiding the strike. His knife met the beast's flank, piercing the shimmering scales. It shrieked in pain, a high-pitched wail that sent a shiver down Kael's spine. "Kael!" Jessa's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. She pivoted, her spear thrusting into the chest of a third beast that had crept up behind them. It stumbled, its energy flaring erratically before it fell, convulsing and thrashing. Kael caught his breath, eyes scanning the clearing for more threats. The beasts were circling now, coordinating their attacks, a sharp contrast to the wild unpredictability of creatures without modification. They were controlled, smart, driven by something beyond instinct. Jessa's eyes met his, a quick flash of realization passing between them. "This isn't just an attack. They're testing us," she said, her voice laced with both defiance and a flicker of excitement. Kael grunted in acknowledgement, wiping the sweat and blood from his brow. I think it's safe to say we've passed the trial already, but I don't plan to fail this final test. He adjusted his grip on the knife, feeling its perfect balance settle against his palm. Jessa smirked, the glow of her spear casting reflections in her pale blue eyes. You're speaking my language, Kael Thorn. Let's show them the meaning of survival. The largest beast, the one that had charged first, recovered from its wounds and roared, a sound that reverberated through the trees. Its horn flared, crackling with an electric current that lit up its face, casting jagged shadows across its hide. The remaining two beasts flanked it, eyes trained on Kael and Jessa, calculating, waiting. Kael felt his body thrumming with adrenaline, his senses heightened. He could hear the insects buzzing in the undergrowth, the distant call of a creature in the canopy, the shuffling of the other beasts as they took their positions. He glanced at Jessa, whose focus was absolute, the edges of her lips curled in a grim smile. We're outnumbered, Kael said, assessing the situation, but not outmatched. Jessa's response was to lower her spear, letting it rest by her side as she stepped closer to him. Their bodies were inches apart, and Kael felt the heat radiating off her, a combination of battle readiness and something more. She nodded, her voice dropping to a whisper. Follow my lead, and keep up, Hunter. Before he could reply, Jessa spun, the spear rising like an arc of lightning as it connected with the charging beast's horn. A shockwave rippled out from the spear's tip, sending the beast reeling backward, its body convulsing as energy dissipated through its veins. Kael surged forward, rolling to his feet and plunging his knife into the exposed side of the second beast. It howled, staggering, before he twisted and brought the blade down hard. The creature's body shuddered before it collapsed with a thud. The third beast hesitated, the shivers of fear playing across its glowing eyes as it glanced between Kael and Jessa. But then, a guttural voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the clearing. It wasn't the roar of a beast. It was something more. The Dra'thaan were speaking, their influence seeping into the minds of the modified creatures. Kael's blood ran cold. They're being controlled, he muttered, by the Dra'thaan. Jessa's expression hardened, her body tensing as she adjusted her stance. And they've sent these beasts as a message. To me. To us. Then let's make sure they understand the message we're sending back. Kael raised his knife, eyes locked with Jessa's, the unspoken trust between them igniting into action. A sudden roar split the air, and the largest creature surged forward. Jessa and Kael met it head-on, their movements a dance of perfect synergy. Jessa's spear lanced out, striking the creature's horn as Kael darted beneath its bulk, finding a vulnerable spot at its underbelly. The beast let out a pained bellow, the sound of its defeat reverberating through the jungle. The remaining two creatures, now riddled with injuries, backed away, their eyes flickering with uncertain intelligence. Kael and Jessa stood together, the clearing bathed in the glow of their victory. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, and a new understanding passed between them. Jessa's voice was soft but strong. The Dra'thaan have sent their challenge, but we've shown them our strength. Kael, who felt the weight of exhaustion, but also something else, a thrill, an undeniable sense of connection, took a step closer. And if they don't heed the warning, then we fight again, Jessa said, eyes locked on him with a ferocity that matched the jungle's pulse. The night was young, but the stars above them shone brighter, as if witnessing a promise yet to be fulfilled. The battle had only just begun, but so had their dance, a dance of survival, trust, and the promise of a future that neither of them could have foreseen. And with the Dra'thaan watching, Kael knew one thing for certain. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready to face it with the Salarian High Huntress by his side. The jungle's dense canopy cast shifting shadows as Kael and Jessa stood amidst the fallen beasts. The faint hum of distant wildlife resumed, signaling the end of their deadly encounter. But silence lingered in the space between them, charged with a mix of exhaustion and something more, something Kael couldn't quite name. The air crackled with the aftermath, the scent of scorched scales and blood heavy in the humid atmosphere. Jessa's glowing blue skin shimmered with the remnants of bioelectric energy, casting an otherworldly aura that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the jungle's heartbeat. Kael took a steadying breath, wiping his blade clean and sheathing it. "Impressive work," Jessa said, eyes narrowing as she scanned their surroundings. The jungle had already begun to reclaim the chaos, tendrils of vines snaking around the bodies of the beasts. "But we've only delayed the inevitable." Kael glanced at her, his chest still heaving. "The DRN won't stop until they've neutralized their biggest threat, you." A shadow of something cold passed over her expression, but it was gone in an instant. She nodded, more to herself than to him. "And you, Kael Thorn, are now a part of that threat." Kael raised an eyebrow at the statement. "That's an interesting title for a survivalist." Jessa smirked, the curve of her lips sharp and full of promise. "You're more than a survivalist. You've proven yourself worthy, not just in combat, but in the way you think, adapt, and fight." The intensity in her voice deepened, and Kael felt a spark of curiosity, mixed with something else that tugged at him, something ancient and primal. "You've earned the right to stand beside me." For a moment, he felt like the forest itself had paused to listen. He wanted to ask questions about the Dra'thaan, about the Salarian trials, about what this newfound bond meant for them both. But the jungle had other plans. A guttural growl resonated in the distance, deeper and more menacing than before. Kael's instincts flared, and he turned to see Jessa already in motion, her spear raised and eyes scanning the horizon. From the shadows emerged another creature, larger, leaner, and with a horn that pulsed with a sinister, deep violet energy. The air around it seemed to bend, distorting the light like a mirage. "Dra'than's hand at work," Jessa muttered, her voice low but resolute. She met Kael's eyes, and for the first time, he saw doubt flash in her gaze. The creature moved forward, a living embodiment of twisted ingenuity. "This one isn't like the others," Kael said, voice steady despite the chaos brewing inside him. He could see it now, the artificial enhancements, the way the creature moved as if orchestrated by a mind that wasn't its own. "It's a command beast," Jessa explained, tightening her grip on her spear. "It's connected to the Dra'than's collective mind. We need to take it down before it can call for reinforcements." Kael felt his pulse quicken as the beast advanced, its violet horn crackling with power. He glanced back at Jessa, who stood unyielding, her posture exuding a confidence he felt he was only beginning to grasp. He nodded once, and they both lunged into the fray. The command beast lunged forward, its energy-infused horn arcing in a blinding flash. Kael dived to the side, rolling to his feet in time to see Jessa thrust her spear forward. The tip met the beast's flank, and a burst of violet light splashed out, illuminating the clearing in a wave of electric blue and purple. The creature roared, a sound that reverberated through Kael's bones, but it didn't falter. "It's not enough," Jessa shouted, gritting her teeth as she prepared for another strike. The creature's energy seemed to feed on the pain, growing stronger, more lethal. Kael spotted the source, a cluster of wires and conduits embedded near its neck. "Jessa," he called, its weak points exposed. "The circuitry. If we take that out, it won't have a mind to control it." She looked at him, eyes sharp with understanding. Without hesitation, she pivoted, diverting the beast's attention. Kael sprinted, weaving through the chaos, dodging the creature's erratic strikes. The jungle was alive with movement. The trees seemed to close in, the shadows deepened, and the air felt thick with tension. Kael reached the beast's flank, the scent of ozone and blood burning his nostrils. He plunged his knife into the exposed wiring, the blade sinking in with an electric crackle. The creature roared again, but this time, its eyes dimmed, the violet energy sputtering out like a dying star. It collapsed to the ground trembling beneath its weight. Jessa approached, breathing ragged but triumphant. Kael stepped back, letting out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "We did it," he said, though the relief was short-lived. "Not yet," Jessa replied, eyes flicking skyward. The dark canopy above them was split with a bright, searing light, an electric pulse that seemed to surge from the direction of the Dra'thaan stronghold. "They're sending more," she said, voice cold and measured. "And we've just made it known that we're not easy prey." Kael's expression hardened as he took in the sight. "Then we better get ready for the next wave." The jungle came alive again, but this time with a different purpose. The battle was far from over. It had only just begun, and Kael realized that this was only the beginning of the war for survival, for power, and for a future that neither he nor Jessa could foresee. But one thing was certain. If they were to face what was coming, they would face it together. And whatever the price, Kael was ready to pay it. The thick jungle quivered as the electric pulse from the Dra'thaan stronghold flared and faded, leaving behind an unsettling silence. Kael's fingers curled around his knife, the hilt slick with the beast's dark blood. He felt the weight of the silence pressing down, the air heavy and charged. Jessa stood tall beside him, eyes locked on the horizon, where the trees stretched into an ominous sea of green. The brief moment of victory had passed, and now the real fight loomed. "They're coming," she whispered, almost as if saying it aloud would make it real. Kael tilted his head, searching for any sign of movement. "How many are we talking about?" Jessa's eyes flicked to the sky, where the dense canopy trembled as if shivering from a distant storm. "A dozen, maybe more." The Dra'thaan are never subtle when they send their packs. The jungle around them seemed to hold its breath. Even the birds, those ever-present harbingers of noise and movement, had disappeared. The clearing was an island of uneasy stillness, surrounded by the unknown. Kael took a steadying breath, feeling the sweat on his back, the thrum of adrenaline that refused to fade. He looked at Jessa, whose glowing blue skin, now smeared with the creature's blood, seemed more radiant than ever. He wondered how many times she had stood in this spot, watching the same darkened forest, knowing that death could come at any moment. "Are you ready?" he asked, though he knew the question was pointless. Jessa was always ready. Her lips curled into a slight, fierce smile. "I was born ready." The first crack of branches was subtle, but it was enough. Kael snapped his head toward the noise, catching the flash of movement. The jungle erupted with sound, a cacophony of snapping trees, howls, and the electrified hum of the Dra'than's technology. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone and blood. The first Dra'thaan emerged, its reptilian form illuminated by blue and purple lights. Its eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto Kael and Jessa as if they were prey. Behind it, the others began to materialize, each more grotesque and twisted than the last, their bodies enhanced with biomechanical augmentations. "Get behind me," Jessa said, stepping forward with the spear raised, its energy tip crackling like a star on the edge of collapsing. Kael hesitated for a heartbeat, then moved. The two of them formed a line against the encroaching tide, their weapons ready, their hearts steady but quickening. Jessa's spear spun with expert precision, deflecting the lunge of the first Dra'thaan, sending it stumbling back. Kael leaped, striking with his knife at the soft underbelly of another, and the creature shrieked as it crumpled, sparks bursting from the wound. The battle was a storm of motion, Kael's limbs moving as if they knew their purpose even before he did, and Jessa's energy-infused strikes slashing through the air, leaving trails of crackling light in their wake. But then, the largest of the Dra'thaan stepped forward, its horn glowing bright and furious. This one was different, almost regal in its presence, the pulse of its energy almost sentient. It roared, a sound that rattled the trees and set Kael's teeth on edge. Jessa met its gaze, a challenge sparking between them. "It's the Alpha," Jessa said, her voice tight. "We take it down, and the rest will scatter." Kael nodded, adrenaline surging through him as he readied himself for the fight of his life. The Alpha lunged, its horn glowing, crackling with energy so intense that it distorted the light around it. Kael and Jessa dove in unison, their movements a dance of precision and trust. They struck at the same moment, Jessa's spear plunging into the creature's flank, and Kael's knife sinking into the exposed joint beneath its neck. The Alpha bellowed, the energy surge so powerful that it blew Kael and Jessa apart, sending them flying into the underbrush. Kael's vision blurred, his body aching with the impact. He pushed himself up, blood streaming down his arm. He found Jessa a few feet away, her chest rising and falling, her blue skin lit with streaks of violet. The Alpha was down, its energy flickering out, its body twitching and then lying still. The other Dra'thaan hesitated, their dark eyes flicking from the dead leader to the survivors. And then, as if understanding their loss, they turned and melted into the jungle, leaving behind only the broken sounds of victory and the faint crackle of energy fading into silence. Kael staggered to his feet, his vision clearing as he looked at Jessa. She managed to smile, the fierce light still burning in her eyes. "You were right," she whispered. "Nothing proves compatibility like fighting for survival." Kael chuckled, the sound hoarse and broken. "Good to know. Though next time we can skip the bloodshed and just go for a drink." Jessa's eyes sparkled with mischief as she reached out to him, her fingers grazing his cheek. "There will be plenty of time for that," she said. "You've earned it, Kael Thorn. You've earned your place." Before he could respond, the jungle's edge erupted in a flash of light. The sound of approaching ships echoed through the clearing, the low hum of engines stirring the air. Reinforcements were arriving, but not for the Dra'thaan. "They're here," Jessa said, her voice now soft but resolute. "The Nexus Guardians. You've done more than survive, Kael. You've become the symbol of change." The jungle seemed to sigh, the weight of victory and survival settling around them. Kael looked up at the sky, where stars blinked and shifted like distant sentinels. He didn't know what the future held, if they would return to their worlds or stay here, in the heart of the Nexus trials. But he knew one thing: whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. And that Kael realized was victory. Jessa turned, her spear now at her side, and Kael followed. They stepped forward into the light, ready for whatever came next, knowing that the storm was not yet over. But whatever the challenge, they were ready, together.